I think there's a bias towards this sort of Silicon Valley startup story that involves, the high school dropout that ends up becoming a billionaire. And I think we've sort of like romanticized that version of entrepreneurship. And it turns out that there are way more successful entrepreneurs in their 40s or 50s.
All right, you're listening to Hawk Talk. I'm here today with Andrew Lacy. How are you?
I'm recovering from a cold right
Yeah.
now, but otherwise great to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're on the upswing, and thanks for being here. So I gotta imagine you're in the delivery room, day you're born, and you just decide like, hey, I need to understand more about what's going on in there. We need to put my mom through a scan. I want a full body scan. Like you just wanted from the beginning, wanted to understand everyone's biology. Fair?
From the beginning, I was a workaholic who was way too stressed, who didn't eat well, who rarely exercised,
Yep.
and thought that I was going to live forever.
Like that.
You know, and that's a great way to live your life, even if it may not be true.
Yeah. It catches up at some point, but it's probably a nice headspace to be in.
Yeah, I guess it's very optimistic and
Yeah, exactly.
positive.
Yeah. So take me back. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Melbourne, Australia.
Awesome. And, did you grow up in the sciences or, like, what were your parents like? What were they into?
No, I had my father is an accountant. My parents are now retired, but I had an accountant father,
Uh,
so pretty studious, and then my mother was a teacher. So
uh-huh.
I attended a pretty basic public high school called Milana College, although its nickname was Marijuana College. So that maybe gave you a little bit of sense of the sort of cohort of people I studied with. I
Yeah,
was studying metal shop and woodwork and cooking, and
nice.
I learned how to sew. So it was a school that sort of, I guess, like trained people for the trades. And luckily, someone saw something in me and pulled me out of it and put me in an academic public school back in Australia and
How old were you when that
set
happened?
me on a different path. This was sort of grade 8, I guess, and
And
a
who was that?
librarian.
Who saw something in you? Like, where tell me more about that.
It was a librarian in that school, actually. A little bit geeky and somewhat picked on, but this person sort of took me under their wing and said, there's this other school where you can sit an entrance exam, and if you do well, you get in, and it's a totally different environment. And it's the only one of these academic public schools in the state where I grew up, Victoria. And so I went sat the exam, and that was sort of the first big positive decision I made in my life to sort of change the path from what was laid in front of me.
Nice. And where did your interests lie at that point? Like, when you were even at that first school, like, were you already into the sciences, or did you like wood shop and all these other things?
I would say I had a real insatiable curiosity for just asking questions. I
Uh-huh.
was the annoying person that asked, 5 why questions.
Yeah.
That, I frequently had detention for basically annoying the teachers by asking why do things,
Sounds like
why is this sewing machine working the way it is? Why is that video camera using? How does that work?
isn't that baffling
Uh,
though? Like, you would think that would be what a teacher wants, right? Is, curiosity, but yeah.
yeah, well, it's they probably what they want is like a peaceful day so they can go back to the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And I definitely wasn't providing it.
Yeah, I was similar, by the way. My teachers, a lot of they're either huge fans of mine or hated me, was kind of my experience growing up in school. Because the ones that liked the way I thought and like saw the same kind of thing, I still am in touch with. And then there were ones that like wanted to send me to the principal's office every day.
And then sort of education was a bit different in Victoria. So we in Australia, you don't apply to college the same way you do in the US. You basically get force ranked
Got it.
against everyone else in the country, and based on whatever score you get to pick whichever course or university sort of meets that cutoff score. So I got a pretty good score, after I'd moved schools, and
Yep.
I could go pretty much anything, and I felt a little bit strong armed into studying economics and law.
Oh yeah, it
Um,
fits right into what you do now.
and it taught me a lot about problem solving,
Yeah.
but I learned pretty quickly that I didn't want to become a lawyer. So then I moved to McKinsey and did consulting for many years.
Uh-huh.
And that also was a tremendous sort of opportunity to figure out how to problem solve in a whole bunch of different industries. But
Yeah.
I just got very frustrated by the fact that, I wasn't sticking around for the execution part. And I thought that was,
Yeah.
obviously the most interesting part of that.
It's always been surprising to me that these consultancies don't actually help execute. Like, I feel like that could be a great additional part of their business model that I don't know, is it if it's the arm's length from the results is maybe a good thing, but I'm not sure.
Well, I tend to think actually it's because I mean it's sort of the execution is the hard part. You
Right.
know, it's the same
Yep.
when it comes to startups. I mean, painting the vision is quite easy.
Yep.
You know, figuring out how to sequence the growth of a company to arrive somewhere at where that vision was is
Yep.
actually the really hard part. So
Yeah. It's my
doing the
favorite.
strategy deck easy, executing the strategy deck much harder.
No, it's my favorite line out of founder. We have a venture fund too, and founders that we talk to, they're like, "Oh, I just need an integrator. I'm the visionary." It's like, "Oh, you mean someone to actually do the work?" Like, got it. No disrespect to EOS, but it's like it's a funny thing that comes up a lot.
Yeah, my story is not one where I dropped out of school at 18 and started, Facebook. Really,
Yep.
I sort of looked up at the age 30 and I saw this very well-trodden path ahead of me. I could become a partner, become a
Yep.
director, go become a CEO of some big company or whatever it has to be. Nice, steady salary growth, be well respected by the business community, and live, frankly, a really boring life.
Yeah.
And so that was my coming to Jesus moment, and I sort of like left that behind and went and started my first company.
And how you said you were 30 when you did that?
Correct. Yeah.
And what was the company?
It was the very first iPhone company back in 2008.
When you say first iPhone company, what do you they use the iPhone or what do you mean?
Well, we were all very excited about the iPhone launch, but most people were thinking of it as just a niche product back then.
Yeah.
And about 3 months after it launched, there was a 16-year-old woman from Paris that figured out how to hack into the iPhone.
Yep.
And this wasn't to do anything nefarious. It was to be able to sort of enhance the functionality of the phone. And
Yep.
one of the first things people did was change the background of the phone, the wallpaper. You couldn't
Yep.
do that on the
Yep.
original iPhone. And we saw this underground community of people that were hacking into these iPhones to do these apps. And my partner and I realized that this was the beginning of a really big wave.
Yep.
And so we started the company and we actually ran the underground app store on the iPhone before the real app store
Nice.
launched, a year later.
Got it.
Yeah.
And is that when you did you keep going after that or did you see that pop up and go, "Oh, well, they just did it." So,
Well, yes, the app store that we were running, was no longer viable. But in the process, we had already had millions of downloads. At some point, we were running something like someone from AT&T, because that was the only network you could use an iPhone on at the
yeah.
time, told us that we were generating 25% of the network traffic on AT&T
Wow.
from iPhones were from our apps to do very silly things like Shazam
Yep.
music or, download these wallpapers or download additional ringtones, things like this. And no one was looking at this space. So, we sat there and we're like, well, what would Facebook for mobile look like? Let's go think about building that social network. What
Yep.
would, what would Yelp look like when you can be in a restaurant and take a photo of a meal right in front of you? And it was sort of really greenfield. And it was sort of a really exciting time to be part of that ecosystem.
What gave you the courage or the push to leave McKinsey? I know so many friends. I have tons of friends at McKinsey and a lot of the consultancies, and you get into this point where you're making a lot of money. They pay really well. Like, and most people don't make the leap. Some people do, but most people, like you mentioned, the boring, steady thing. Like, it is really hard to leave those salaries to start a startup because it's a
Yeah.
big drop. It's not like you're leaving a 60K a year job to go start a startup.
No. I mean, first of all, I did it the wrong way. I tried to put together a pros and cons spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It was such a consultant thing to do.
Yeah.
Con, less salary, pro, more control of your life, pro, work on something I'm passionate about,
Yeah.
con, not as much free time. I would ask my entrepreneurial friends, I did this spreadsheet and it doesn't seem to make sense to become an entrepreneur. And, and they're like, yeah, it's sort of one of those leap of faith things. It's not like having children.
Yeah.
You sort of, there's not a lot of people that regret doing it, but like the logic doesn't often stack up when you sort of think about it
Yeah.
before you take the leap. And so I just in a period of frustration, I went on vacation and started the company. And then when my employer called me to come back, McKinsey, I'm like, well, I actually don't think I really want to. Um, and
Where were you
that
on
was that.
vacation? Where'd you
I
go?
was
Where'd you go?
Oh no, I was on vacation in the Bay Area starting the company. And even that process was sort of hard coming from consulting and law. And I had an MBA at that time too. So these were sort of 3 points on a resume that no one valued at all in Silicon Valley. I actually interviewed with Google and Salesforce, and I was just looking for a job in the tech space. That was sort of like the first plan I had, and it was just hard to get interviews, and no one really I thought I was a smart guy who could do some things, but I didn't have any experience that was really relevant for tech back then. It's changed since then, and so the backup was to start a company. And I, of course, like I'm eternally grateful that those big tech companies didn't see anything in me and didn't offer me a job.
All right, so you build this and you end up being 25% of the traffic on iPhones. What ended up happening? How did that progress?
Well, the crazy thing was this was 2009 and the global financial crisis happened in 2009. So
Yeah.
we were doing all this experimentation. We had 10 or so apps, none of which were making any money. And then the financial crisis happened, and we went from being something that was investable to something that was going to go out of money in, 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
So we immediately turned to, we basically killed everything except for one game that we had that was doing really well. It's a game called Tap Tap Revenge,
Uh-huh.
and it was sort of like a Guitar Hero for the iPhone. And it was the most popular game on the iPhone. It was sort of number one for about a month on the charts until they changed the algorithm, or maybe until enough people had downloaded, there was no one left. And it was the very first free to play game on that device. And then it became the first game to use advertising. Then it became the first game to use in app purchase. Then we built sponsored apps with musicians, with folks like Will I Am or Katy Perry or Metallica or Green Day. And we sort of just rode that as long as we could and sort of experimented with every way that you can monetize on this emerging mobile platform. We managed to be profitable, which was sort of something at the time, sort of was a difference between us failing and us sort of having a decent exit at the end.
And how long did that last for? How long was that timeline for doing all those things?
That was 3 years.
3 years. Got it.
3 years from couch to, from sleeping on a friend's couch
Yeah.
in the early days to selling the business to Disney. And then
You did.
my
Nice.
partner and I, we joined Disney to figure out how we could take their IP and bring it to this platform.
Got it. And so you guys were running sort of the mobile side of Disney, trying to figure out how to leverage mobile?
Correct. Yeah. And I was running their clinics for a while, and it started to feel a bit familiar about a year in. It started
Yeah.
to feel like working for a big company.
Yeah.
And so I had spent a lot of time in Europe actually running some of their studios over there. And around that time, I met the woman who's now my wife. So I left Disney and moved to Paris, of all places,
Nice.
ostensibly to hang out and do angel investment. But pretty quickly I was working on another startup.
Yeah. And so what year was that? 2013?
That was yeah, around 2012, 2013.
Cool.
Yeah.
So fall in love, move to Paris. And what'd you end up starting? By the way, I love how I'm gonna say like typical it is for like a great entrepreneur to be like, I sold it, I made money, I'm gonna take some time off, and 2 days later they're working on their next thing.
Well, I hired an engineer to teach me how to do engineering. I felt
Yeah.
like that was the piece that I didn't really know,
Yeah.
and of course I didn't want to like just teach, learn from a book. I wanted to learn in an applied
Yeah.
sense. So we started building something. But here was the problem. We built this sort of like vertical search company in
Yeah.
the field of travel.
Okay.
And, I was on this high coming off selling that first company. And it's really interesting, like, especially if your first company goes well,
Mhm.
it's kind of easy or maybe natural to attribute a lot of that success to you. I thought I was pretty shit hot. Didn't matter what I was going to do next. It was going to be successful because so much of the success
Yeah.
of the first company was attributed to me,
Yeah.
ignoring much more logical explanations like market timing or the space that we happen to choose. So I chose a pretty bad space. And over 2.5 to 3 years, had basically the hubris sort of kicked out of me in the most brutal, stressful way possible, trying to grow a company that was self-funded. So my own money was on the line. That experience really set me up for a lot of choices I made around what to do next,
Yep.
and to not repeat some of those mistakes.
Did you shut it down after 3 years or
I
what?
found someone to buy it, but
You
it
did.
was,
Okay.
think of it like an acqui-hire. And about a year after selling it, I came back to Silicon Valley, ready to start number three.
Why was that such a rough space, or what was the business that you tried to start?
Well, I mean, travel, most people, you just need to say the word travel, and investors sort of will run as far as possible from like funding that thing. And if you talk to a lot of veteran entrepreneurs from the travel space, the first advice they will give you is do not start a company in this
Yeah.
space. And everyone told me this.
Yep.
And what I told myself was, screw these people. I'm a smart guy. I'm going to figure out what they didn't. It was something I was passionate about too, which, I guess was part of the equation. But I learned pretty quickly that, I'm passionate about a lot of things that make
Yeah.
really bad business ideas.
It's funny. I've talked to I do a lot of speaking at colleges and stuff, and the idea of pursuing your passion is always funny to me because it's like one of my favorite things to do in the world is snowboarding. I'm not going to make a living off it. I'm not going to compete in it. Like it's the you can be passionate about something. It's not going to be your career. I think it's really easy to also find passion when you find something that you're good at that's also successful. Like it's very invigorating. It's fun.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, if you're working on something that's a great space, a great product, a
Yeah.
great company, and you're passionate about it from the get go, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of like the outlier.
Right.
I think the main challenge with passion is you put these blinders on, and you have this sort of confirmation bias. You have to see things consistent with, like the space that you're in
Yeah.
being great because, you're so like emotionally committed to it.
Yep.
And so the biggest decision I made after doing that company was to never again start a company that was my own idea. One of the things that McKinsey taught me, because I worked in everything from banking to concrete companies, was, I can get passionate about solving a problem, an important problem in almost any industry. So
Yep.
how about go and talk to people out there and find problems that are interesting and potentially valuable to solve?
And so you go back to Silicon Valley. How is the is your wife Parisian?
She lived there for many years. She's Eastern European.
How was it convincing her to move to San Francisco?
It was sort of a culture shock for her. And having spent time myself in Europe, I sort of came to understand it as well. There's no place like San Francisco for like all of the good aspects of the ecosystem that it sort of like contributes to startup.
Yep.
But also, there's probably no other place in the world where there is such a concentration of people with wealth that don't do anything.
Ah,
Um, you know,
yeah.
there's no restaurants, or not very many
Yep.
restaurants, not a lot of
Yep.
entertainment, not a lot of things to do. And when you live in places like Paris, and after I saw my second company, I went to London. These
Yeah.
are, like New York, they're like
Yep.
large cosmopolitan cities. There's always stuff to do, and San Francisco still feels pretty small in
Yep.
that sense. So it was a real culture shock for her. I had convinced her to go
Yep.
because my belief was you can only build a great company in Silicon Valley.
Yep.
And what ended up happening was I worked on a company, Prenuvo, where we actually launched in Canada. I spent most of my time in Vancouver, Canada. So she was not happy with that.
Yeah. Beautiful city, though, I will say, I like Vancouver. I was just up in BC in last week up until Monday. So you jump on Prenuvo, you said is so was this someone else's idea? As you mentioned, you wanted to pursue someone else's idea?
Yeah, I sort of went out to the universe and I said, hey, I told all my friends, I want to do something else. I don't know what it is. Introduce me to interesting people that are trying to solve problems.
Yeah.
And I got connected. It was incredible. Like so many people connected me to different folks. And I would do various different deep dives for a week or 2 weeks or a month.
Mhm.
And one of my friends said there's this, that she had gone to get a scan up in Vancouver, Canada in this little clinic. And she thought it was wonderful and it should be something that is everywhere and I should go check it out.
Yep.
And so I jumped on a plane and went up there and did this scan. And I learned more about my health than, I had learned my entire life. And it
Yeah.
just really felt like I was seeing the future of healthcare.
And so there
And it
wasn't any,
wasn't,
like
and it wasn't in Silicon Valley, it
yeah,
was in Canada of all
a
places.
and there wasn't a trigger like you say it saved your life or someone else didn't have a scan. It was just like you understood the implications of this regardless of the personal effects.
Well, she had got the scan with her mother, and they had found an aneurysm, and the mother
Wow.
had the aneurysm, what's called coiled.
Yeah.
And the same week that she was in the hospital for surgery, actually, her sister died of a burst aneurysm. So there was sort of a pretty tragic story behind
Yeah.
introduction to the company. But, and I felt very nervous, because I was thinking about this experience as being, okay, now I get to see the sum total of the way I have abused my body as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I get to see a full accounting of this.
Yeah.
So the night before I went out for a nice dinner, I had a nice bottle of wine. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, my life is going to change after this. I did the scan and I learned that I wasn't dying of anything. There was
Yep.
some stuff I had to manage. I came back to San Francisco, and for 2 or 3 weeks, I could not shake this incredible feeling of peace of mind. I'd be
Yeah.
walking down the street, and I'd be
Yep.
like, in my brain, pointing to people on the street and saying, "I know what's going on in my body. You don't. You don't. You don't. You don't."
Yep.
Like, and whenever I had a headache, it was just a headache. And whenever
Yeah.
I had pain in my stomach, it's because I ate something bad. It's just so hard to describe that feeling to someone who hasn't done the scan. I mean, you've done the scan, so you
Yeah,
probably
no, and yeah,
understand it.
obviously first time we're connecting, but did the scan a few months ago and was pretty open about it. I did a post about it that I think was probably the most viral post I've put on LinkedIn too, because I did that and a colonoscopy and did quarterly blood panels. Like this past year, I was just like, I'm gonna get fully into my own health and really get my hands around it. And the most intense thing, not most intense thing, but the most all encompassing thing was probably this Prenuvo scan. And you guys set it up in a way, and I don't blow smoke. Like, I'm not saying this just because you're on the podcast. Like, I watched a Bruce Willis movie while I got an hour MRI, which I've had an MRI before and it's miserable. Like, I'm not generally claustrophobic, but an MRI can be claustrophobic. But you throw on some mirrored glasses and watch a movie and you forget you're even doing it.
Yeah,
And it's just the way you guys have done it is such an experience. And then I think it was like 2 days later, not to overpromise for your other customers, I get a full printout of everything about my insides. And it's like this 1 millimeter cyst on my kidney that is benign, but now I know. And it's like the fact, like even having something like that pop up made me go, you guys are picking up things with, I think it was actually 3 millimeters or something, but it's like you're picking up something that small. I can now, just like you said, feel so confident that you saw so much that like these are the couple things that I need to worry about. There was only one thing that was I have a couple slip discs probably from snowboarding too much that are but it said, you probably don't need surgery, review it with your doctor, you probably just need PT, which was right.
yeah,
And so now I'm in PT for that so that I don't make it worse. And it's like awesome. Like it's
y
amazing what it does because of I think we all live with a little bit of hypochondrianism or something that you're waiting, you get that chest pain that could probably be just a muscle tensing up. And you're like, there it goes, my heart's going. Like we all think that we're just a ticking time bomb and we're built that way. And when you have that confidence of like, I now have, I know that right now I'm good. I'll probably do another one in whatever the timeline should be. Actually, I'm curious, what is the timeline to redo a Prenuvo?
usually a year or 2, depending
Okay.
on the person and their
Yeah.
age and their risk
Yeah.
factors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so for the next year or two, I'm good. Like
I mean, I actually do mine every 6 months now,
there you go.
and the main reason is I missed the appointment for my 5th scan, and it took me another 6 months to go in.
Got it.
And, this might sound a bit strange, but, I still get nervous when I go in for the
Totally.
scan, and because it is, again, like an accounting of what might be going on.
Yeah.
I know if I go in on time, if I go in on the time I'm supposed to go in and they find something, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
If I delay and I go, I start to feel like it could be my fault. And now
Yeah.
my psychology kicks in. I'm like, well, now I don't want to go in because now I've got to like get an
Well, and that
accounting of like my failures as, the person who's driving this body through the earth.
well, that's something we started talking about this slightly before we were recording, but cut it off to have it here. But like the psychology of it is fascinating, and I've said it on the podcast before. But my father passed away because he never wanted to get a colonoscopy, and it's really sad because he had 2 years of symptoms, finally got a colonoscopy, and he had stage 4 colon cancer. Was able to fight it for 9 years before passing away, but could have saved all of that if he had just gotten a
Yeah.
colonoscopy, which now as someone that's been through it, it's the easiest thing in the world. Like the fact that people make it a hard thing is ridiculous. So, and I know you guys could pick it up too. So, what is it that he had that so many people have that's an avoidance of like, I just don't want to know because obviously it's not rational. It's like it's there whether you check or not. It's not, does the tree fall in the woods? Does it make a sound if no one's around to hear it? Like, yes, it does.
Well, I'll give you my best hypothesis, but I do think this is the question for the ages. I have a 1-year-old kid now. And the funny thing about young children is if they have a boo boo, they want to show you. And something happens between being a kid and being an adult where all of a sudden now if you feel pain, you don't want to acknowledge it to yourself. You don't want to tell other people about it. You sort of want to wish it away and you convince yourself it's going to be gone tomorrow. And I asked myself the question, well, where does that come from? And
Yeah.
and the best hypothesis I have is the health system sort of has created this environment for us because if we wait until symptoms present and we go into the hospital and get a scan or whatever it is, and you inevitably are catching things late. So you're catching late
Yeah.
cancer or Alzheimer's or, spinal issues when you need surgery.
Yeah.
Why on earth would you want to go and look for a medical
Yeah.
diagnosis? Because in that world, every day we've been primed to
Yeah.
expect that a medical diagnosis is going to be, a
Horrible.
horrible thing, a
Yeah.
life-changing event. That's why I went to go have this nice meal before I did my
Yeah.
scanning.
Right.
Like, and that's not me. I'm not unusual. I don't think.
Yeah.
I think that's the health system. That's the
Mhm.
impact that the health system has had on us and the way we think about our health.
I think that has a lot of truth to it. I mean, my dad used to say that he had bad experiences, in the 50s and 60s with doctors and dentists. So he never wanted to go to either because every time he went, it was horrible experience. So there's
Well, it
definitely
doesn't
like,
help that it's a bad experience. I mean, we
right.
try and make our experiences as different to a hospital experience as possible.
Yeah, no, and it's solid that way. I mean, again, went through it here.
Yeah.
Where are you based now?
I'm in LA.
You are, yeah,
Yeah.
same. So I went to the one in Brentwood and it was
Yeah.
really easy experience. Yeah, because it is fascinating to me is like there's the logic. And now, especially these days, I mean, another, wear a whoop, like constantly. There's so many easy ways to just monitor your health, and so many people resist it. And I've heard it. I've had friends ask me about the whoop, try it out, and tell me, no, it's giving me too much anxiety. I want to know all that about myself. It's like I do the
Yeah.
opposite. Like I watch like how things affect my sleep, affect my recovery, affect my heart rate, how anxiety affects me, stress affects me. It's like this is fascinating, and it really like to me it's more freeing than it is stress because to me it's like the things that I feel like most people would over-index and think that they're worse off than they are, and I think that's why every time you go to get a scan, you're a little worried because like you have that in the back of your mind, and you have that whether you go get a scan or not. It's hard to avoid those thoughts.
You're probably a better longevity CEO than me. I still am stressed. I still don't sleep enough. I still probably could eat better. I'm doing exercise, a lot more exercise now. But
So to be clear, the only reason I eat decently when I do is a meal prep company called Kushi that I use. That it's like they used to be. I think it used to be Kobe Bryant's chef or something, but they're only in LA. But that's the reason I've got diet under control. Because if it's up to me,
okay, I
today
get
I didn't have it today, and I had Chick-fil-A. Just to be clear, like it's not, which tastes great, but yeah, it's definitely part of my hack is like outsourcing it, make it not my problem.
here's the excuse I tell myself, by the way, and it works, but it's
Yeah,
probably not. There's a little bit of self delusion here. I think that longevity also has become a little bit unattainable. I mean, when you look at all of these stories about what people are doing, and I mean, they literally have a 10-hour regime, and they have to go to bed at 8 at night, and they have
yeah,
no social life, and
yeah,
all this sort of stuff. I'm like, I'm not sure I want that life, and I'm
yeah.
not sure a lot of people really associate. Like they see
I agree.
themselves in that. So I use our test as almost like insurance. Like I'm
Yep,
still probably going to be a little bit abusive of
yep.
my body, but I know that nothing is going on that I need to be concerned about. Or the things that are going on that I know about, I can do something about.
You
Yeah,
know Ben Greenfield, who was on you probably know who Ben Greenfield is.
yeah, I
So
know.
he's a friend. He was on the podcast too. And when I first met him, he talked about his like 250 vitamin a day regimen, like his exactly what you're saying. This is the first foray I had into that. And I just looked at him like, so your full-time job is living longer. Like
Yeah,
I have other stuff to do. And I made fun. He's come around a lot to make it a little more attainable. But like now Brian Johnson's the best example of that, where it's like I only eat at 6 a.m. And then I go to, it's like, or I think it's 6 to 11 a.m. He wakes up at 6, then he's in bed by like whatever it is, 8 p.m. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, if my entire life was focused around how to add a few years to my life, I could do that. But that doesn't sound like the life I want
Well,
to
I
live.
actually think you can add a few years to your life by sort of 80-20 it a little bit.
Yes. No, I agree.
And so that's I walk on a treadmill desk every day, like
Yeah.
I do half a marathon a day usually. So just low impact,
Yeah.
keep the body, cardiovascular system moving.
Yeah.
I try and sleep better. I do a
Yeah.
Prenuvo, I do blood tests, and I
Yeah.
do my routine screening, and that's kind of it,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Do you use Eight Sleep yet?
Yeah, I've used obviously sleep tracking, and I've used CGMs as well.
Uh-huh.
But I sort of
Eight
feel
Sleep's
like,
the cooling mattress, the one that makes your
oh
mattress.
yeah, no, I haven't used that one, to
It's
be honest.
awesome. A little side note, like that was something that I bought a couple years ago, and like I now see when I'm home versus not, and how much better I sleep in that thing. Like, anyways,
My
and
wife
I
does
could,
not like a cold bed, so I don't know how to
it's
handle this.
50-50. It
Oh
heats
yeah.
and cold. That's actually the benefit is now I can have a cold bed and my wife can have a warm bed. It's the exact same problem.
No,
Not trying to sell a bunch of products, but yeah,
there
this
are
is
these. I
put on.
think there are these small number of interventions, and I think there's a lot of people in the market today that are trying to, and a lot of consumers are trying to figure out. Okay, I did the annual physical at my GP, and that pretty much sucked.
Yeah,
They didn't tell me anything that I didn't know looking in the mirror. What's next level?
yeah,
And I think we sort of had designed Prenuvo to be sort of like 100 times better than a physical at the GP.
yeah,
There are other people doing things as well, blood, function,
yep,
health, and
yep,
different folks that have like different takes on this. And
yep.
I think collectively, these solutions are going to be what is going to be routine in the years to come.
I totally agree. And there's no reason to not to be. It's not that, like, as you said, it's the 80-20 rule. Like, you don't necessarily need to spend your whole life making sure you only eat before 11 a.m. But if you do these things to monitor where you need to make some fixes along the way and triage, where you're deficient in vitamins, where you might have something inside that you need to take care of before it's a problem. Like, these are all great things. So I am curious. You go up to to get back to that part of the story. You go up to Vancouver. You love what they're doing. How did you jump into the business? What happened next?
I spent some time understanding the business. I bought the IP, and then we set
Uh-huh.
up a US company to basically exploit it
Yeah.
in the US and around the world. And
So did you
and
buy
we
that location too, or they like kept the location, but you
we
took
kept
it
the
over?
location, but
Yeah.
we took over some of the business there,
Yeah.
and it was a really interesting journey because this is my fourth company. There was another one that I worked on that was a failure in the middle, but
Yeah.
I felt like I had learned a fair bit about building companies. We had started this thing in Vancouver, and we were getting to like a couple $1,000,000 of revenue, and a profitable business. And I went back to my Silicon Valley network and said, "Okay, it's time to raise money."
Yeah.
And what we quickly found was that there were every single VC had a doctor on their sort of investment committee, or
Mhm.
had a doctor that advised them on medical businesses,
Yeah.
or had a personal doctor that they asked, and every one of them said that this is a bad idea and they shouldn't invest. So everyone passed. So I
Did
ended
they give you
up
the
sort of
feedback? Like, what was the common feedback as to why it's a bad idea?
it was that screening had been tried in the past with CT, and it was you could go to a shopping mall 20 years ago and get a CT whole body,
Got it.
and it was involved a lot of radiation, and the
Yeah.
technology wasn't very good, and it sort of like poisoned the well
Yeah.
for screening in general. And
Got it.
and of course, like we use MRI, so we don't use radiation,
Yep.
but MRI is this kind of qualitative imaging modality. So an MRI sort of like 30 years ago took photos like a Nokia sort of mobile phone took photos. And the MRI today, now it's like, we're like iPhone 14.
Yeah.
It's come a long way. It's a lot faster. It's like, it has much better resolution. It's better able to like classify things that we see between benign and concerning. So
Yeah.
a lot of doctors just didn't really keep up with like what was happening in the space. And we're in Vancouver, which is always hard to raise money from people in Silicon Valley that don't want to get on a plane. So I ended up sort of just funding the company myself,
Wow.
and getting we got some bank loans, and we my the radiologist I was working with at the time and I, we just worked hard to set up a location in Silicon Valley,
Yep.
and then we finally screened a whole bunch of VCs and were able to raise money to then grow. Having
That makes
said
sense.
that,
That
I
was the
can't.
strategy. It's like, we built this now. You should come check it out.
Correct. And to be clear, like 95% of the VCs that came and checked it out told us, I'm going to do this every year for the rest of my life, but I'm not going to invest as a VC. So,
We're a brilliant bunch, aren't we?
because we don't understand your path to reimbursement and how big can
Yeah.
this consumer market be. And, there's just like a lot of excuses. But we were seeing as we screened people, just like what a profound impact this was having on people's lives.
Yeah.
I mean, in the early days, we used to do a consult with every patient after the scan, and they would get up. Most of them would get up at the end of the consult and hug the radiologist. And I have never in my life had any desire to hug any medical professional that I worked with.
But I gotta I mean, it's because you go in there with thinking about this could be bad. Like, I could have cancer somewhere. I could have something wrong with me. And when you hear the good news, which I'm sure most of the time, or even if you hear slightly bad news that's treatable and you caught it, you're gonna be happy 95% of the time.
Yeah, although to be honest, that was true also for people that we delivered bad news, and it's very,
Yeah.
very rare that we ever have to. But they would hug and say, "You know what? Something's been going on in my body for like 2 years,
Yeah.
and no one has been able to tell me what it was, and
Yeah.
you gave me clarity." And so it sort of plays into a little bit the one of the mistakes that investors made is they tended to think of us as like a longevity sort of like intervention.
Yeah.
But actually, the two biggest categories of people that come into our clinics are, one, people have had cancer or have a family history of cancer, and for them, not getting screened is affecting their quality of life.
Yeah.
And then the other category are people that have symptoms. They're sort of indeterminate symptoms.
Yeah.
And as health system is great if you break your arm snowboarding, they're pretty good
Yeah.
at diagnosing that. But if you have like intermittent migraines or
Yeah.
abdominal pain, we actually are really bad at sort of diagnosing those things fast.
Yeah. No,
And they
and
come to us to Doogie Howser that thing.
that was my I don't think it's slipped different bulging disc, whatever they called it. Like, that was it. I was like, I have some neck pain I've been having and it's like tight up there. And then I got it and I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. That is the problem. Okay. Now I'm clear. How do I treat this? Like, it's just such a breath versus like, who knows what it could be, how bad it could be. Do I need surgery? All those kind of things.
So it was a hard challenge to raise money. We finally did it,
Yep.
and now we've been able to grow. And we're now in 20 locations, and we've probably made about 3,000 potentially life-saving diagnoses, mainly
Wow.
cancer and aneurysm. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. And every day there's a new story of someone who, we found something that was really impactful in their lives.
How many total scans have you done to this day? Do you know?
Well, over 100,000. We announced
Wow,
100,000 back in December. So
amazing. And when did you launch? Like, when was the Silicon Valley open?
in the end of 2020, so during COVID,
Okay, so
basically.
that's fast. And 20 locations, are they all over the US, or where are the locations?
They're in pretty much every metro area in the US. There's a
Yeah,
few we're missing that we're sort of adding
yeah,
during the course of this year. And then next year, we want to go international. Oh, this year, we're also going internationally. So
you are.
we'll
Cool.
be in Europe, in Australia, where I'm from. So my
Yeah,
parents can get a scan. And then we're looking at other markets as well. So it's kind of a pretty cool year for us as we look to expand, access to these scans that I think are even more profoundly sort of helpful than I can possibly sort of market them to be.
how did the Kim Kardashian thing come about for endorsement? Because every time I mention it to someone, they go, "Oh, the Kardashian thing."
Sort of really organically, if I'm being honest. So we're building this new category product. And the challenge is not a lot of people are aware of it. Even
Mhm.
today, I mean, Silicon Valley, maybe more people are aware of it, or maybe some folks in LA, but probably as a percentage of the US population, maybe 2% know about these technologies. And building awareness is tremendously expensive. It's
Yeah,
top of funnel
yeah,
marketing. The CACs are completely like crushing. And so we said from the very beginning, we're going to grow as fast as word of mouth enables us to.
uh-huh,
And if we want to accelerate word of mouth, we better have a great clinical experience and a
mhm,
great in clinic experience.
yep,
So from the very beginning, that was sort of like our differentiating lever. And and to be honest, like the health system is such a horrible experience for many people that it was like even more profoundly, exciting for people to
yep,
experience it because it was so different. And a lot of people wanted to talk about it. And so even in Silicon Valley, probably 90% of people that come in because they've heard about it from a friend or family or colleague or something. And when we opened in LA and New York in particular, we just had a lot of people that have these tremendous audiences. And we encourage them to share to save lives. And the Kardashians have been really, really gracious in
yep,
sort of letting people know. But also, there's been hundreds, 100, 200 sort of like influential people that are talking about the scans to their audience.
yep. No, I think I've sent you guys almost a dozen people at this point, just
There you
because.
go. You're doing your bit too.
Well, and to me, back to the point is like nothing to do with just being promotional. It's just like when I find something that can help my life, I want to share it with people. And I'm like, I've seen the downside of not, screening and checking things out. So if I can convince a few people that, to go do that, in some ways save lives, feels good. Um,
Yeah. Well, for every 20 or so people, there's a life saving diagnosis. So,
right.
some of these folks that have these huge audiences,
Yep.
it's really incredible. I mean, we analyzed the folks that came in from just one post from Kim,
Yep.
and it was over 100 people, 100 lives that she had saved
Wow.
from diagnoses that we had made from people that were asymptomatic. So
Yep.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that I think is the reactive the reactive nature of healthcare versus getting proactive. I think that trend, which I believe, as you said, with Function Health and you guys and a bunch of others, I think there's something really cool happening there that will be interesting. So a couple more questions for you. Number one, what's next? You mentioned international expansion, but like, what's your vision for this? Where do you want to take it?
Both domestic and international expansion for me is we sort of have got our operations together that's kind of a little bit on autopilot.
Yep.
I would say the most interesting area of research that we are pursuing as a company is around AI. And here, I don't talk about LLMs. I talk about actually more old school, AI. We use a lot of deep learning and
Mhm.
CNNs, and basically we're building a lot of algorithms to be able to identify biomarkers in the body.
Yep.
Some of that are obvious things like building algorithms to identify cancer or
Yep.
aneurysms or enlarged hearts or prostates that are infected or whatever it happens to be, like diagnosing medical conditions. And eventually that's going to make radiology a lot more efficient. But also we're able to start because we're imaging people that are asymptomatic, we're starting to understand like the very early origins of disease.
Yep.
And we're able to pick up on these little subtle changes with AI that the human eye really can't easily identify.
Yep.
So this might be like, let's say you come in, for another scan in a year. It might be that this particular vertebrae in your cervical spine, now the curve angle has changed by 2 degrees
Yep.
or has straightened by 2 degrees, one
Yep.
being bad, one being good.
Yep.
Or we start to understand that dementia is not just about brain volume loss, but it starts with obviously loss in the hippocampus.
Mhm.
And even before you see hippocampal loss, you start to see flattening of the corticals on the outside of the brain.
Wow.
And before you see flattening of the cortex outside of the brain, there's like a perfusion, like a blood perfusion signal that we can pick up in the brain. So we're starting to really sort of like roll back the clock on many of these conditions that really are almost defined by being at a chronic stage, but we can maybe identify them 10, 20, 30 years before, when maybe all you need to do to affect the trajectory of that disease is to like sign up for your meal plan
Yeah.
and start eating healthier.
Yeah. On that note, have you thought about other biomarkers? Again, partnering with a blood test or, just to add that level of data to what you guys are analyzing.
Yeah, I think we're looking at that space. I mean,
You are. Cool.
a lot of people are asking about it. We have a lot
Yep.
of people that are doing, Insight Tracker or
Mhm.
Function Health or one of
Yep.
these sort of like testing platforms. There's a lot of point solutions out there.
Yep.
And we really focused on MRI because we just thought it had the highest yield for one test.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that there aren't other tests that can like increase the yield from there.
Yep.
I think there are diminishing returns. I don't think you need to do
Yep.
30 tests or 20 tests
Yeah.
or 10, but there's like three or four that I think are really important. They're not just additive, but they're multiplicative because,
Yep.
I mean, we might see ischemic change in your brain, and, the two most likely causes are high blood pressure or cholesterol.
Right.
And if we're also taking blood tests or like measuring your blood pressure, we actually know what the cause is. Yeah, we might see cirrhosis in the liver, like might see fatty liver, but if we know that you have normal LFTs, it might be more sort of a genetic disposition of fat as opposed to like a disease process, or
Yep.
it might affect the severity of the diagnosis. So I think
Yep.
these things combined can be really, really, really powerful, and that integration is currently happening by physicians. But I think in the future we'll see products that are doing this.
Love it. Looking forward to that day. So, last question from me is you've obviously had a pretty amazing career. You've jumped on a lot of things, you pursued it, you got tons of no's on this and just decided to throw your own money at it and made it happen. What's your piece of advice to someone that like wants to pursue their own dream to go for it? Like, what's something you either did hear or wish you heard that really helped you keep going?
I think there's a bias towards this sort of Silicon Valley startup story that involves, the high school dropout that, ends up becoming a billionaire. And I think we've sort of like romanticized that version of entrepreneurship. And it turns out that there are way more successful entrepreneurs in their 40s or 50s, people that can bring like real deep experience from a space to a new venture. And there's probably a lot of investors that are like negatively biased towards like older entrepreneurs. And I think that's a real opportunity, because, the data would seem to indicate they might be a better bet. So, if someone wants to be an entrepreneur, my advice would be actually go find fast growing entrepreneurial ventures that you can play, where your area of responsibility can continue to grow as a company grows, and sort of like learn as much as you can from being around those folks. And then when the time is right, take that experience and go build something yourself. I think that's a way more successful path than maybe starting, as an 18-year-old with sort of like living on a sofa and eating ramen and just trying to figure something out that you've never done before.
Totally
Um,
agree.
yeah. And
Awesome.
I love working with people. I love hiring people into my company
Yeah.
that have this profile. I'm
Yeah.
eager to learn. I want to take
Yeah.
ownership. I'm ambitious. My job is to like, our collective job is for that person to develop as much knowledge as they can in like 3 or 4 years,
Yep.
contribute to the company,
Yep.
and then leave, go start something else, and I'll write like the first angel check.
Yep. No, same here. We've invested in a bunch of our former employees' companies. It's awesome the way to do that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming on Hawk Talk.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Eric.